Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Eco Money on Money FM 89.3.
Welcome to Eco Money. As the world grapples with climate change and its effects, Singapore had earlier announced at the UN Climate Change Conference COP29 in Azerbaijan a commitment of $500 million as part of a national initiative set to channel financing to decarbonize Asia. This will be a major component of the National Blended Finance Initiative, which aims to raise up to $5 billion to finance green projects in Asia. But as we saw at COP29, finding equal footing and funding is no easy feat. So what role should private capital play when public funding isn't enough to tackle climate challenges? For more insights, Melvyn Yeo, founder and managing partner of TRIREC, a venture capital firm focused on decarbonisation investments, joins us now on the phone to talk more about what I have just discussed. Melvyn, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on to talk about this pertinent issue. Now, in light of recent stalled negotiations, Baku, around climate financing, how crucial do you think it is for private capital, or how crucial is it that private capital steps in when public funds fail to meet climate finance targets?
I think I'd like to kind of phrase it as not to beat up public financing, because to be fair, the governments around the world have been putting up effort, not just in financing, but also in policies and standardizations of regulations. So a lot has been done as well, and there's a lot on the plate, obviously. But yes, private capital is a part of the conversation that needs to be had. And how do we bring private capital and shine the spotlight more? That we need to do more as well, be part of this whole equation. So financing is actually a spectrum. It's not just public and private, but it covers the entire spectrum, and both have to go hand in hand.
All right, so what are the most effective ways to align private capital with the urgent decarbonization goals of developing economies, especially where investment risk remains high and where the financing gap is most severe?
Yeah, this is, again, a topic that I could go on for half a day, but there are a number of key topics that we need to address on a private capital perspective for people to come in. And one of which is the ability around standardization of regulatory and frameworks, so that private capital investors understand, where their money are going to, what kind of risks they're taking, and most importantly, what kind of returns, and are they able to get, capital back. So things like capital control, all those things have to be addressed as well, not just environmental frameworks and standards. Things like how we define the carbon markets. So as you guys know, in COP29 in Azerbaijan, we had finally a breakthrough in terms of the Article 6, providing more clarity around how we define carbon markets and what we can do with regards to cross-border trading, for example. So that was a big important step that we took forward, and glad that Singapore was part of the equation and leading efforts there as well.
Yeah, so before I dive further into how how investors assess ROI on climate projects, what would you say are the key barriers preventing private capital from stepping up at this current moment?
I think as private capital, as you know, a lot of it is investors looking for returns and getting returns for the appropriate level of risks that are being taken. The issue with climate financing is that there are a number of projects to be financed, and they all have different types of risks, and the returns sometimes may not justify the risk that we're taking, right? So again, I think there are a few things that we need to cross the lines over. One is, again, regulatory uncertainty. Definitely, we've got to ensure that the countries who are looking for private capital to come in a meaningful way to bridge the gap probably needs to be clearer in terms of their policy frameworks, even their energy markets, in terms of how they intend to buy, let's say, power, and under what kind of a policy and pricing. And probably also looking into things like standardization of reporting matrices and frameworks. So in the case of, say, green bonds, again, that's a great product to encourage private financing. But I think we're still in infancy stages with regards to how should we look at, reporting, their standardized frameworks, if I'm trying to finance the decommissioning of a coal-fired power plant, for example. So those things are still, in flux. And I think the faster we get to the global standards and frameworks, the faster that private capital can have the clarity to come in.
Look, I think, Melvyn, you made a really good point about the fact that returns from climate adaptation projects are pretty hard to come by on a project-by-project basis and almost non-existent from projects meant to address loss and damage. So how would you convince those on the fence in the private space to fork out funds for climate-related needs that don't necessarily turn a profit, at least not in the short term, doing good for the sake of good and not just, to try and meet shareholder returns?
Well, the way I think about this is that from a financing and a returns perspective, the spectrum, right? You got one end of the spectrum, which is completely non-profit in nature. And so it's not generally about returns. Of course, we still need some level of returns, but that's not the primary objective. There'll be other more pertinent objectives there. And all the way out to, purely capitalistic capital, right? It requires the right rate of returns. So I think it's trying to kind of match that kind of, risk profile, so to speak, or the returns profile of investors to the right projects. And then where the public-private markets can converge is really where there are gaps that risk can't be taken by the private sector or you need a little bit more of a nudging. Then I think that's where the public funding can step in to help bridge the gap a little bit. So the concept of blended finance is quite critical in this whole process. Whether it's talking about first loss or talking about creating a first-of-a-kind type fund to finance pilot projects of deep tech that can do big reductions in carbon reduction, but requires heavy payback that, like you said, takes a longer time for returns to come in.
Yeah, the blended finance model that you've cited, the synergy between public and private, seems like a pretty good strategy to begin with. Are there any examples that you can share of such models that already exist?
Yeah, actually, the one thing that came out from COP29 in Baku, obviously here in Singapore, was the FAST-P initiative that was launched by MAS, where it helps to provide, I think it was 500 million,
that's correct,
more than 5 billion, right, of capital injected to be managed by few private sector institutions with the objective of energy transition, to accelerate energy transition, to make green investments and nature-based solutions, right? So this is a very, very good example of how blended finance can kick in and the collaboration between public and private. But I'll also cite a much longer example where this actually have existed in the past before. So one of our local companies called Sunseap, which is the energy solutions business that was started in 2010, I believe. One of the first, if not the first, to install a 10-megawatt solar project in Cambodia. And this was if I'm not wrong, in 2014. So again, long time back. And obviously to de-risk that project, Asia Development Bank came in to provide more than $9 million worth of debt financing to help to nudge that project forward. And the Cambodian utility then came back with 20-year power purchase agreement offtake all the energy that was produced from that solar farm. So this is a great example that blended finance actually has existed for a long time, but now, people are just, bringing it back to the forefront and putting a lot more capital behind something like this.
All right, well, let's hope that there are more such projects to come in the near term and in the longer term as well. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, Melvyn, this morning.
Yep, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. You were hearing from Melvyn Yeo, founder and managing partner of TRIREC, a venture capital firm focused on decarbonisation investments. Stay with Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.